one, really, examining the death of Clare Wood by a man she met online. Brand new Swipe Right for Murder contains images and discussions of real-life crimes.
Whether you're prepping for guests or hosting the roast, the Christmas spirit is in the air. Tasteful Living, sponsored by wayfair.co.uk.
91 million of us worldwide search for love online.
She was looking for love.
She wanted someone that would give her the freedom to be herself.
He looked like a normal, nice guy.
But internet dating can be a dangerous game.
The mother of two small boys reported missing early Sunday morning.
In the UK alone, crime linked to online dating has risen 450% over 5 years.
This is a predator's paradise.
It's that dark side of the web that people don't realize exists.
These are the real-life love stories that ended in tragedy.
Each day, she was living in fear.
I knew that he was no angel, but he really had me tricked.
So how well do you really know the person you're dating?
She didn't stand a chance against that monster of a man.
Manchester's an amazing city. It's very lively. There's lots going on. And Manchester and Salford pretty much sit alongside each other, so the boundary of Salford crosses through Manchester city centre, really.
The people that live in and around Salford are some of the most fabulous people you'll ever meet. I certainly enjoyed a number of years policing the streets of Salford. Greater Manchester Police covers an area of about 2.75 million people. It's not without its challenges. There's still very deprived areas in Salford. There's certain parts that suffer quite badly with crime, low-level disorder. But this case shocked the local community of Salford. They were appalled at this senseless and tragic murder.
"36-year-old Clare Wood's badly burnt body was found in a bedroom at her home in Blackfriars. Weeks before Miss Wood's body was found, she'd gone to police to tell them that she feared for her safety and to make an allegation of assault against a man.
She was a gregarious, talkative, easy-going girl, and she was always game for a laugh. She was a lovely daughter. I couldn't have asked any more of any kid. She was full of life, full of beans, and ready to smile.
Very happy character. She always wanted cuddles and hugs, and she was just incredibly loving. She was generous to a fault. You know, she'd give, even though she was broke herself, she'd give the last penny away to make somebody else happy, and that made her happy. She was the perfect sister, I'd say.
In 1999, aged 29, Clare Wood had a daughter and got married. The couple moved to Manchester, about 40 miles away from her father and brother. But Clare's marriage broke down.
She'd been with her partner for 8 years, and all of a sudden she says, I've moved out.
Clare was diagnosed with bipolar disorder.
Bipolar disorder is a disorder which involves extreme highs and extreme lows of mood. Think about normal mood and how we have ups and downs. Well, these are really extreme. So Clare's bipolar would have left her feeling very, very vulnerable.
Clare began to receive medical help for her condition. She settled into a new flat in Salford. Her daughter stayed with her ex-husband during the week.
Clare had her daughter every weekend that she could, so that precluded her going out at a weekend. Most people were working during the week. And Clare was never what you call flush with money.
Battling loneliness, Clare turned to the internet for company. She also began to use it to look for love.
The internet has a lot going for it. It really has. And if it's one way to meet a partner, why not?
Radio journalist Michelle Livesey reports on stories in and around Manchester and was heavily involved in Clare's case.
It's difficult when you're a single mum, and it's difficult when, you know, you're balancing work life with all your other responsibilities. How do you find time to then socialise and try and find somebody to have a relationship with?
Everybody wants to be loved. You know, they all want to meet the right person. I'm not saying the perfect person, because nobody's perfect. Yeah, everyone's got their little quirks and things that I find annoying. But she wanted to find somebody that just loved her for who she was.
Who isn't in search for love? As human beings, I don't think we were designed to be loners. In fact, you look down on loners as hermits or whatever. It's always a derogatory term. We're all looking to be somebody special. And I don't think Clare was any different.
Clare Wood was diagnosed with bipolar depression. She's then entered into online dating sites. Now, does this amplify her vulnerability? Without a doubt it does. She's going to be meeting strangers. She's going to have people who are going to lie. But of course she's vulnerable, very vulnerable. The bipolar means she might invite people into her life without doing the necessary psychological checks or the risk assessment we may do when we meet somebody for the first time. So without a doubt, just the state that she was in at that time psychologically meant her vulnerability was amplified by going to all the social media and online dating sites that she did.
In April 2007, Clare met a match and an online friendship quickly developed. The man's name was George Appleton.
I didn't really think much when she said that she met George Appleton online. I just thought, I'm pleased for you. She was lonely, you know what I mean? If she's met somebody that's good for her and is going to get her out and about and, you know, and do her good, I thought, great.
George was a 40-year-old fairground worker who lived nearby.
Clare and George Appleton started talking online, sending each other messages quite frequently over not just the internet dating site that they met on, but then social media. Talking about each other, what each other liked to do, each other's interests, each other's background. He portrayed himself to be this person that Clare could rely on, this person that loved Clare, that would look after her, and that would, you know, that would spend the rest of his life with her. So there's Clare thinking she's got this perfect relationship where she's met a man who is showing her attention, is showing her love, is showing her affection, is making her feel special.
It wasn't long before Clare brought her new man to meet her family.
She turned up at my house one day, and totally unexpected. I didn't expect a visit at all. It turns up in this death trap of a car with my niece in it, my young niece, and I'm thinking, you've driven all the way from Manchester in that? With my sister and my niece? I mean, that were a bad introduction in the first place. But as soon as he were in, he'd never met me before, I was finishing some work on the computer and George turns around to me and says, "Oh, I'm good with computers. I hacked my ex-girlfriend's email account." And I'm thinking, you're telling the brother of the girl that you're dating? Is this guy an absolute idiot or what? Right, so I just stood up and I said, "You're going." I says, "That's it, you've done." So I got my sister, you know, "You can come back whether you want." I says, "But don't bring him back. It's bad news."
Clare's dad also had an uneasy feeling about George.
He'd just come from his son's house. She took him through the door and I just took an instant dislike to this lad. There was something about this lad, it turned my stomach. When he came to my house, I thought he was casing the joint. And I couldn't get him out the door quick enough. I thought, "You've made a mistake here, kid." And just to reinforce that, my son came down and said, "Have you seen him?" I thought, this lady's making a hell of a mistake. And I told her so. And she said, no, that was what she wanted, and fine. She was no kid. She was a 36-year-old woman with a brain. And she said, no, he's what I wanted.
Clare meets George Appleton online, and we know that Clare's father and brother took an instant dislike to George. Is that because of the online world? Does that mean she's willing to forgive any shortcomings that other individuals may see in George? Well, not necessarily. That could happen in life. The online world doesn't change that. But what we must remember here, the reason why people use dating apps is because of ease, but also because they're lonely. And, of course, that is the aspect of why she might forgive any shortcomings that George was portraying, because she's got a new partner.
As the relationship progressed, it continued to create friction.
She came back to me months later and said, "We're thinking of getting married in November." And I says, "Well, if you do that, girl," I says, "it's going to put an awful strain on me and your brother." I says, "because both of us took an instant dislike to this laddie."
In the following weeks, Clare became increasingly isolated and reliant on George.
My sister was unfortunately suffering from bipolar depression, which means any sort of attention that she got was an uplift to her. She also felt a little bit sorry for this lad. You know, he had a bit of a rough past by the sound of things. You know, and she thought, you know, give this lad another go. You know, nobody can be that bad. And I think she just thought maybe she could save this character just like she felt he was saving her.
She thought he was the light of her life. He was going to do everything for her. He went for her prescriptions, he went for her shopping. He never left her side, but little did she know that was part of the grooming.
Retired Detective Superintendent Phil Owen has studied the original Greater Manchester Police investigation into Clare's case.
Their relationship started out probably as one of mutual love. I think it probably quickly turned into one of a coercively controlling relationship where he was doing his utmost to try and isolate, both emotionally and physically, Clare from her extended family network and maybe from friends as well.
He probably knew that Clare's father and brother didn't like him, so the more he can isolate Clare through control, the more he actually then controls her, because he's actually turning her against her own family and own friends, because he wants her to believe the only thing that's good for her in her life is George Appleton.
6 months passed and George continued to dominate Clare's life. But he had been leading a secret life of his own. He had been having affairs with 4 other women whom he'd met online.
Clare wasn't stupid. Clare was an intelligent young woman. And I think as time went on, she did start to learn a bit more about George Appleton's true colours and the fact that it wasn't just her. She realised he'd actually been having an affair with several other women that he'd been talking to on internet dating chat rooms.
Claire discovered this, and obviously she saw that as a line in the sand and said to Appleton, "That's it, our relationship is over."
I was surprised it finished, but it did almost immediately, as soon as Claire found out that he was texting or whatever other women. She gave him his marching orders. She didn't trust him, and she asked just to leave it alone and to back off. And I think she was hoping for a friendly breakup, but that wasn't to be the case.
Appleton refused to move on.
Claire was met with, a tirade of abuse, harassment, damage to her property, and I think at that time she must have been very frightened. So went to Pendleton Police Station to make an initial complaint of criminal damage and harassment, and was seen at Pendleton by a police officer who took a statement from Claire and, for want of a better phrase, opened an investigation into George Appleton.
The next day, on the 8th of October 2008, 18 months since they first met, Appleton went to Clare's again. He began battering on her front door. Claire was too frightened to answer. She called the police.
George Appleton was arrested. He admitted the damage, but denied any harassment and denied any violent behaviour towards Claire. He was bailed from the police station to return in early November. We placed various restrictions on him not to contact, and also not to go into Clare's street.
We had these strict bail conditions not to enter Clare's street, but that didn't stop George Appleton. He always managed to find a way around that, to the point where he actually came into this alleyway and was caught peeking over the fence into Clare's backyard, letting her know that he was still here, that he was still going to be harassing her. Bail conditions weren't going to stop him.
He just kept threatening to burn the house down whilst we were in bed. Said he were going to kill her. It were just different things, just menacing threats all the time. Obviously I didn't receive the phone calls. I can only go from what my sister was telling me and how upset and scared she was getting.
It sounds like the harassment was a sustained campaign against Clare, and it's likely that George was trying to regain control over Clare, perhaps by scaring her, by showing her that he's still there, and no matter what she did, she couldn't get rid of him. His breaking of rules and any penalties imposed upon him to stop harassing Clare just shows someone who's not put off by authorities and who's going to persist and persist until they get what they want.
Each day, she was living in fear. She was subjected to death threats. She was subjected to harassment, and it's just shocking, and it's sad. It's really, really sad to think that somebody lived with that amount of fear.
Former senior police officer Colin Sutton has worked on many high-profile murder cases involving domestic violence.
Claire does the right thing when all this is going on. She reports it to the police and says, look, this man is actually having an effect on my life and on my well-being. But I think what we see as the story unfolded was that the protection that the law gives to people like Clare from people like Appleton is cumbersome. It's kind of bureaucratic, and it's not designed for quick, snappy responses.
This bureaucratic system allowed Appleton to make Clare's life a living hell.
She went from a somewhat outgoing girl to being one of the observers of life.
In November 2008, Claire decided to seize control of the situation.
Claire writes a letter to the officer in the case. That letter is asking that Appleton doesn't undergo a custodial sentence. Part of her motives then may be feeling sorry for George Appleton, and quite rightly Claire was worried about her own safety and the safety of her daughter, and was frightened of the consequences for those actions.
It was actually, you know, quite a creative solution that Claire thought she could bring to the situation by writing to the police and says, OK, enough's enough. I will drop the charges against Appleton. I don't need to do anything about him, but I want nothing to do with him.
Claire's letter seemed to have the desired effect. Appleton's harassment subsided, and she was able to contemplate spending a happy Christmas with her family.
She came over here for Christmas time, which we had a very good Christmas. It was lovely for her to be down here, and I drove around to see aunties, uncles, grandma, granddads. I got her to do the works. We had a good laugh. It was great seeing the New Year in with my sister. I'd never done that before. Not with my sister.
Just after Christmas, officers visited Clare, and Claire reiterated that she wasn't seeing Appleton hadn't had any reoccurrence of any threats or any issues.
But Appleton hadn't gone away. On the 18th of January 2009, Claire called police claiming that Appleton had sexually assaulted her.
Appleton is arrested in the early hours of the morning on suspicion of attempted rape and sexual assault. He's taken into the police station, he's interviewed, and then he's subsequently bailed. The police at that time didn't have sufficient evidence to charge him and go to the Crown Prosecution Service, so he was bailed to re-attend the police station in about April.
But for Claire, there was more terror to come.
What then ensued over the next couple of days was that Appleton contacted Claire on social media using a variety of different social platforms, clearly in contradiction to his bail conditions. He wasn't allowed in any way to contact Claire, but he was doing so.
He carried on contacting Claire, not physically or verbally, but via social media. The psychology behind that is power. The fact that he feels he can get away with it. He was in control of this relationship. And that's the psychology behind harassment, the fact that how much more can I push you? How much more can I say? How far can I take this? And he was prepared to take it the whole way.
Every time my profile got reported by my sister, they blocked the profile, then he'd just make another one. And it just kept coming and coming and coming. There's nothing she could do about it. The only way that she could do anything about it would be stop using social media again. Completely. But that would have made my sister a victim again.
He was on bail for harassment and criminal damage from October. He's on bail again now for an attempted rape. Those two investigations weren't joined very effectively in understanding the true picture of the risk that George Appleton posed towards Clare.
Having just been released, it looks like he might have just decided he needed to put an end to this.
It must have been about the 5th or 6th of February. We hadn't heard from Clare, and I phoned my ex-son-in-law. I said, look, will you do me a favour, go in past and tell my daughter to pull her finger out and get in touch. We're getting quite concerned.
When he arrived at the property, Claire's ex-husband let himself in. Inside, he found Clare dead.
The day that we first came aware of Clare's murder was like any other news day, really. A busy news day. We were setting our news agenda for the day, and an email dropped from Greater Manchester Police to say that a woman's body had been found at a house in Salford. All we know at this stage is a 36-year-old woman been found with horrific injuries.
I was just leaving my place of work, which was Armley Prison. I was just handing in my keys when one of the warders said to me, "Mr. Brown, there's a phone call for you." And I picked up the phone. A lady on the other end of the phone said to me, "Mr. Brown, I'm just phoning to tell you we've just found your daughter's body. You can't come to the house because Clare's home is now a scene of crime, and until such time as we've finished with it, it's out of bounds to you. We will be in touch, and we'll give you as much news as we can, as soon as we can." And put the phone down. Well, I walked out of the prison in a daze.
Clare had been found in the bedroom. She had been raped, strangled, and an attempt had been made to set fire to the bed where she lay. While her body was found on the 6th of February 2009, it's believed she was murdered on or around the 2nd of February.
It was the last thing in your mind that would ever happen to you, and I couldn't think straight. I couldn't understand why this was happening to me or why it had happened to my daughter. You expect to go through life and you're expecting to bury your parents and your grandparents because that's a natural progression of things. But Clare should have been stood at my grave, not the other way around. Nothing prepares you for the earth-shattering news that you get that your kid's gone. And the way my kid went, I wouldn't wish on any other parent.
We didn't know much about the victim at all, but we did have that information about the suspect police were looking for. We had the picture, we had the details of the car he was driving, we had what he was wearing, and more importantly, we had his name, and that man was called George Appleton.
There was DNA on a cigarette that was recovered from the property. We know he had the motive for it. We know he'd previously assaulted and was on bail for attempted rape. And there was certain other forensic recovery undertaken at the address that led the investigation to believe that George Appleton alone was the prime suspect for Clare's murder.
But Appleton had vanished, and a national manhunt began. On the 6th of February 2009, CCTV footage was released of Appleton from the day before. The police, media, and local community all joined forces to try and bring the prime suspect to justice.
The murder of Clare Wood shocked Salford. They were appalled at this senseless and tragic murder. So clearly, the investigation team at the time enlisted the support of the local community and the wider media.
George, if you're listening to this, if you've accessed the website, I'd urge you to make contact with the police. If you don't feel confident in doing that, can I ask that you contact your solicitor? It's very important that we speak soon.
Police were asking people to let them know if they'd been in touch with him online in the months leading up to this murder.
We knew he was having online relationships and physical relationships with other women who potentially could be at risk. And the priority for Greater Manchester Police during that time was to catch Appleton at the earliest opportunity.
As word of Clare's brutal murder rippled through the community, the news came as a huge shock to one local, Appleton's ex-girlfriend, Carol Agnew.
I was in work, and my friend Marie, she was living with me, and she rung me. She said, "You're not going to believe this." I says, "What?" He said, "George." She told me over the phone. I nearly broke down. I came straight home and I phoned the police straight up because we didn't know what happened to George, because George went missing, and I phoned up the police and they offered me a panic button up to this stage. But when I heard about Claire, it just broke my heart.
Carol had suffered a similar chilling experience with Appleton.
From the beginning, he was quite a nice guy. I wouldn't have thought that it was going to change down the line, because he used to put on the charm. He used to be nice and gentle, and he just used to be charming. I started seeing that he was getting a bit more possessive on me. He wanted to be in control. That's the way he was coming across to me. So I decided to end the relationship, and I told him, and he was going mad at me. He just kept constantly ringing me after that, and that's when it all started. The rejection started coming in, the nastiness, the threats. He was going to kill me, he was going to do this to me, do that to me. I just couldn't believe he could have done this to another human being. What I went through, he did to her.
And it wasn't just Carol and Claire. George had a long history of sickening abuse towards women, but nobody had told Claire.
George Appleton is a man of violence. He's been convicted for harassing a previous girlfriend, partner. He's known to have held a knife to a woman's throat. He's been convicted of sexual assaults. You know, thoroughly unsuitable man to be a potential partner in a new relationship. And yet, he is able to create multiple profiles on internet dating sites and engage in conversation with women like Claire, who are completely oblivious to the sort of man they're dealing with and the sort of background he had.
He'd met women through social media. It was his thing, really. It was how he sort of preyed on his victims. And he was a bit of a loner. He didn't really have that many friends. And so social media really was his way of making himself feel big, making himself feel like the one that women wanted to be with, and portraying himself as this lovable, funny, kind, caring guy, when really he was a nasty piece of work.
George Appleton showed many characteristics of being a psychopath. The violence that he carried out on many victims, and also the control he's got when it comes to the verbal abuse. He enjoyed that verbal abuse. So with the two aspects of the verbal abuse and the violence, these are characteristics of a psychopath.
In the days after Clare's murder, the manhunt took control of everything. Headlines, all media output. It was leading all the main national headlines as well as our local headlines. Not only was there a local community in shock at the murder of a young mum on their doorstep, but also the fact that the person that police thought was responsible was out there. When somebody's name's put out there with a picture, all airports and the ports were all put on alert, you'd think that the police would be able to find him. And as the days went on, and there was no sign of George Appleton, the panic in the community, you could feel it.
Carol felt that terror more than most.
While George was on the run, I virtually stayed indoors all the time. I never budged out the house. I was just thinking he might have turned up here, or I would have got threatened, or he was going to try and get in my house. I locked all the windows and we made sure that he was secure, the house. I made sure that he couldn't get in. And I had someone with me all the time. If he's killed once, he'll do it again.
On the 12th of February 2009, around 10 days after Clare's murder, the press received another urgent bulletin from police.
Another email drops through, and that email said that police have found a body. So really, you're looking at days on end of this appeal, this manhunt to find this murder suspect. You know, all that fear in the community, all those appeals, all those warnings not to approach George Appleton. And it ended here, right here in this pub, this derelict pub where George Appleton hung himself.
Despite the scale of the manhunt, Appleton hadn't gone far. The derelict pub where his body was found was less than a mile from Clare's house.
For the family, there was mixed emotions because they were never going to get that justice. And I think that's what hit home with me, because when you have a murder investigation of this scale, where you're actively looking for somebody who has done something so horrific, it's unimaginable, you want to see them be brought to justice. You want to see them being taken to court and to be sent to prison. And unfortunately for Clare's family, they were never going to get that.
The police phoned me and said the commotion was over and they had found his body. And bless him, for as much as a man as he was, he couldn't face the punishment that was coming to him.
Appleton's suicide could have been a way of getting out of going to prison. If he knew that he'd failed to cover his tracks, he may not have wanted to go to prison as a sex offender. He'd been to prison before, so he knew how sex offenders may get treated in the prison system. Appleton's suicide could also have been a way of him having the final say, him determining and maintaining control of how the story ended.
They go by that, don't we, sir? I say, and go through comments on media sites and just floods memories back. December the 17th, 2008. I was looking forward to seeing her brother. Always hurts. Always hurts. You don't realise how much you think getting over it, and then you read it again.
The fact that he was dead, of course, meant that he couldn't be charged with the murder. And there's an element of frustration for everybody concerned in that, because from the point of view of the police officers, it's kind of a slightly unsatisfactory ending to your investigation.
But Clare's story was not to end here.
Weeks before Miss Wood's body was found, she'd gone to police to tell them that she feared for her safety and to make an allegation of assault against a man. The Independent Police Complaints Commission is due to look into the contact Greater Manchester Police had with her in the weeks prior to her death.
The hunt for George Appleton, that ended here in this pub, but it was also a new chapter in terms of the investigation into what went wrong. You know, why was Clare murdered? Why, when police knew about the fears that she had, did she end up dead?
Detective Superintendent Phil Owen assisted Greater Manchester Police with the inquest.
Normally when someone is murdered, there's a criminal trial. But because our prime suspect, and an only suspect in the investigation, George Appleton, had killed himself, there therefore needed to be an inquest. That inquest was held in Bolton in May 2011.
During the course of that inquest, it emerged that the police knew that Appleton had previous convictions for domestic violence. But they had been unable to warn Clare because of data protection rules.
Clearly the person responsible for Clare's death is George Appleton. But I think individuals and collective organisations may look back on the incident to say, maybe we could have done more. Maybe we could have done more to protect Clare and keep her safe.
A separate Independent Police Complaints Commission investigation concluded that more could and should have been done to provide Clare with the support and protection she needed. But it cannot be said the failures by Greater Manchester Police or individual officers led to her death.
To suddenly start hearing those details of the situation Clare was in, the fact that the agencies and the authorities that were meant to be responsible for looking after us and Clare didn't and had failed Clare, it was shocking. It was really shocking.
I was appalled at what happened to my daughter. I asked why my daughter hadn't been told, and they said data protection. And did my daughter die because somebody couldn't tell her? And if that was the case, I was shocked. Why couldn't my daughter have been told that this man was violent?
A hard-hitting Key 103 domestic violence campaign's uncovering fears that the number of victims in our region could be through the roof. It's believed around 65,000 people reported domestic abuse to the police in our region last year. As more and more women seek help, we're calling on the government to grant them the right to know if their partner has a history of violence. It follows the murder of Clare Wood at the hands of her ex-boyfriend.
Clare's father helped begin a campaign to make lawmakers take notice of what had been discovered over the course of the inquest.
It was very successful in persuading the lawmakers that there ought to be a right for people to know the past of people with whom they're starting a relationship, and equally there ought to be a right available to the police to disclose that information. And it was well supported by lawyers, by charities and interest groups, and also in Parliament.
Michael worked closely with journalist Michelle Livesey to persuade lawmakers at Westminster of the need for change.
I, as a journalist, felt that it was my responsibility and that I had an opportunity and I had a duty to use my position to make sure she didn't die in vain and make sure that other women didn't suffer the same fate that she did.
Clare's law came into force across England and Wales in 2014.
It now allows individuals who are victims or believe they're victims of some sort of abuse, they can go to the authorities and ask for information about their partner. I know that within the first 10 months, there were 1,500 applications. That alone shows that it's something that should have been around for some time.
Clare's relationship with Appleton raises many issues about the nature of online dating.
Clearly, I think there are individuals using social media and using the online world to exploit vulnerable victims and to go out and target and purport to be who they're not. And therefore that presents them with enormous opportunities to exploit, to embellish, to engender themselves to individuals before they ever meet face to face.
The online world, the internet and social media, has allowed people to meet, interact and communicate far more than ever. That automatically means it will facilitate any online offender because they can have that constant contact 24/7, which allows for 24/7 control. And that's the issue we have here with all these very sad cases of individual offenders who've then gone on to murder or sexually abuse. We know it's a lot about control, and that's what the internet affords.
For Adam, Clare's law marks a new chapter in his relationship with Dad, Michael.
I feel like I've got closer to my dad since this has all happened. And as I said, I think age and realisation and having a child myself, it just naturally pulls you closer. I'm not going to let my dad miss out on my daughter. No, I'm going to take every opportunity I can for her to see him. You know, as I said, you never know what's going to happen.
I didn't set out with lofty ambitions to save the world or to do away with domestic violence. They say, did you do it for your daughter? No, I didn't. I couldn't do it for my daughter. My daughter was already gone and suffered in her going. I wanted to make sure that girls in the future didn't have to go through what my daughter went through.
For more Swipe Right for Murder catch-up on demand with Really on UK TV Play. Next we examine the mind of the Milwaukee cannibal Jeffrey Dahmer in Born to Kill.